It's ZynVaded week on the Game Room from the fantastic independent game maker We Have Issues Publishing. Like, subscribe, and comment all week for your chance to win the choice of a 2-player starter box or the new Don't Let the Zed-Bugz Bite starter box. You'll also get your choice of 2 Mercs models when the Kickstarter ships. The winner will be chosen from the YouTube comments on this week's videos, so get those comments in for your chance to win. It's ZynVaded week on the Game Room.
Welcome to the game. John Vogel, thank you very much, sir, for being on the channel with us. Welcome.
Well, thank you for the invite. It's great to be here, bud.
Folks, we are kicking off ZynVaded week, and John is the creator of ZynVaded. And I just wanted to get John on. Let's talk about the game a little bit, about these fantastic models, and what this Kickstarter that's actively going on right this minute until sometime later December, middle of
the 26th.
The 26th of December.
26th.
You will have about 2 weeks once this video airs, which should be pretty soon. It is a fantastic game. I was first introduced to it by pure happen chance back in 2019 at Gen Con. Happened to be walking by and just kind of turned my head, and somebody says, "Hey, you want to check out our game?" And I looked over and I was like, I saw crayons and markers and little models, and I was like, dude, this looks weirdly cool. And so I was like, yeah, show me this game. And I was sold. 5 minutes after seeing the models, seeing hearing the story. The story is fantastic, and it's actually been fleshed out over the last couple of years. So it's really cool. I just can't stop geeking out over this game, and it's the whole thing about it. John. I don't want. Let me ask you.
Sure.
Give us, what is ZynVaded? So anybody watching knows, what is ZynVaded?
All right. So the premise of the game is there were a race of insect-based aliens that had come to our world with the intention to invade and conquer. When they got here, they didn't realize they'd gotten some bad information because they didn't know how large we were going to be. They honestly thought we were much smaller. So when they get here, they see how big we are, because the figures themselves, they're 1:1 scale, so they are actually life size. Those figures in front of you represent the actual size of the characters. And so half the fleet does not want to continue the invasion. The other half does. So they're fighting each other for control. So the half that doesn't want to continue the invasion, the ones that just want to blend in, gather some resources, and stay off the radar, are called the Save 'em. The other side, the ones that want to continue to try to take over and subjugate the human race, they're called the Kill-All. And so they're actively fighting right now. And see, when they landed, they actually made their base of operations in the basement of a Chinese food restaurant, which is what explains the packaging for the game.
And this is one of the coolest packages I've ever seen in the game. It is a large Chinese takeout box. Everything you need to play the entire game is in here. All the models fit the rules, and it came with the pencils for marking your stat sheets. It came with the tape measure. It came with the dice. I mean, it was an entire package in an easy to take out. We've actually, after we picked it up from you in 2019, so 2019 was like I said, was my first introduction to this game. My daughter and I, we were playing it at the airport on the way out. If anybody's watched any of those other videos, you've seen pictures of her. I
remember seeing the videos online of you two playing. It was so much fun to watch that, to see that.
And it was so fun because, I mean, it's 3 models a side. I mean, how much smaller of a skirmish game can you get? 3 models per side. We were playing at the airport, and we were actually right at the main entrance. So we had 6 hours before our flight because we were sitting there.
Wow. Okay.
And people were coming in, and they would stop and say, "What are y'all playing?" Because we're we got boxes stacked up, and we've got these little models. I've got models next to the people, hiding behind the water bottle of the people sitting next to us, and they were like afraid to take a drink, you know. And she was like, I needed to get my water, and I was like, oh, please don't, you know. It's like, oh my gosh, my guy's out in the open now, because that's part of the game, is the terrain could move. And so we just had so much fun. We actually had people stopping and asking us about it. So we knew you had something here, and we've had a blast with it.
Well, and honestly, I love hearing that. I will say this: we're not super well known yet, but I will say this, man: our core fans are hardcore fans. They are really in it, and that means a lot. I'm happy with that. I'm happy to just, if it takes a while for us to get up and out there, I'm just thrilled to have the kind of fan base that we have. I mean, they're really dedicated, and they're just a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I kid you not, it's a super simple game. You can play it very quickly, and then you can turn around and play it again. And I ran, just to kind of, you know, show some stuff off. We did some demos at a local store, and people who were not gamers were buying the starter boxes because it was so much fun. And these guys were like Pokemon, you know, trading card gamers. They've never played a miniatures game. They loved it. Everybody that saw said, this is the coolest thing ever.
Well, we like to call our game a gateway game. If you're on the fence about miniatures, not really interested in miniatures, this is a great game to try out, because typically you have 3-on-3. It's 3 miniatures against 3 miniatures, depending on how many players you have. I mean, each player has basically 3. There's an option to add a fourth member to the team, and there'll be options to add up to probably a 5th and 6th member coming down the line. But we want to keep this game small. ZynVaded Evo is meant to be a really small skirmish game. A lot of the skirmish games now, you're still talking like a dozen figures maybe per team. And not that that's bad, because I like an involved game too. But for this type of game, we really wanted to keep like a Saturday morning cartoon feel to it. Right. And with this small of numbers, it's so easy. You could get a game in over lunch. And again, where you can play it anywhere. It's a really great fix if you just want to roll some dice and have some fun with your buddies.
And being contained in such a small container, you can take it anywhere.
There you go.
We have taken it to restaurants with us. So while you're waiting for your food to show up, we're playing across the board. Yeah. Plates show up. All of a sudden, your terrain has changed while you're actually playing the game. That's just, you know, and people are always like, what are y'all doing? We're playing a miniatures game, and kind of explain what it is. And the backstory is hilarious, about how they, you know, took over their part of the galaxy. They've come over here. They got bad information, showed up. And I always picture it, whenever I try to explain to somebody, I kind of picture it as, hey, they jumped out of their scout ship, and like the first one got stepped on by a giant foot. And then they realized, wait a minute, you know, these humans are supposed to be smaller than us.
This was not what we were signing up for. Yeah, definitely.
You know, so.
Well, the funny thing is this actually came from an idea I had for a comic book when I was in high school. We lived, my folks moved us in 9th grade. They moved us out from Massachusetts down to the woods in Pennsylvania. And so I spent a lot of time like splitting wood and doing chores around the yard, which was fun and new. And so I just had this imagining that there were these little insect dudes living inside like logs and trees, and not necessarily that they were aliens, but they were just evolved insects. You know, that's how they evolved from. And we have Issues Publishing started out as a comic book company, but we just could not get traction. That is just a hard beachhead to land. And so after a couple of years of fighting uphill on that one, we were like, we're really gamers. What are we doing? And so we were trying to come up with a game idea. And it's like, let's do a game that everybody can get into. You won't need to do a heavy investment. If you just buy the starter set, that's all you'd ever need to buy, but we'll still have extra stuff for people. And so that's where it first came from. I was like, well, what about 1-1 scale? What if we have the little guys are actually the little guys? They're actually that size. And so I evolved the story a little bit from the comic book idea I had, and then threw it at my buddies and were like, well, yeah, let's try it. And so at that point, I'd been converting the absolute craziness out of any figures I'd ever owned. And so I was like, well, I want to try my hand at sculpting, you know, at making, you know, a figure from start to finish. And so I've right now I'm the one that sculpted everything so far. So and of course, at first it was all physical, and now thanks to some health nonsense, I have to kind of turn over to digital now. But that's not doing too badly either. That's getting there. So
you kind of mentioned that. So how was the conversion from? So these original models were cast in resin, and
Yep.
they were multi-part. I want to say these
Yep.
big guys were like 5 or like 6 different pieces.
Probably, yeah, anywhere from 5 to 6, and some of the figures are honestly 7 pieces.
Yeah,
There are a lot of pieces on
bigger ones. Even some of the
well,
some
especially
of the mercs, which
yeah,
we'll get to in
Zouch,
just a
especially
second.
Zouch is the one I'm thinking of because he's got the most parts, I think, honestly, the predator looking dude.
Yeah, actually, I believe you are correct, and we'll
Yep.
talk about the mercs here in a moment. But
Yeah.
but they're not that difficult to put together. But you did cast them. You basically hand sculpted them all, created the molds, and
Yep.
then you cast them all in your garage, or what?
Hand cast. Yep. I have a shop in my basement. I've got one of those little pancake air compressors and some pressure pots. And basically, I converted the pressure pots to tanks. I mix up after I make the figure, I test out and make a mold to master it. Once the mold turns out that, after I check all the bleed lines and make sure everything's going to work, then I created like a negative of it. So I'd box up half the mold and I'd pour resin in there to make a negative of the mold. So if I had a blowout, I could make a new mold real quick.
Right.
And so once the molds were solid and good, then I'd start casting the figures out of them. So I basically spray some release inside the mold, rubber band it together, and then mix a 2-part epoxy resin, pour the resin in, and it was about a 30-minute life on it. 7-minute work time, but 30 minutes till it was solid. Pour the molds, tap out the air, kind of squeeze it out the best I could, and then throw it in the pot, put about 50 PSI in it, and it would squeeze the air bubbles as best it could. And it was a really steep learning curve, just starting out, because all I had to go by was what friends were telling me or what I could read and what I could see online. And so I did get to a point though where I can probably make a mold for anything, honestly. I got pretty proficient with it. And so I was hand casting every figure. That's why if we went to shows, we ran the risk of running out of stuff because it's only so much I can cast at a time. And so we'd maybe have like 20 sets of the game and maybe a half dozen to a dozen of each merc and additional figure depending on what they were. And when we first started out, they were all one-piece models, which was boof. So the molds were a lot trickier. And then I started venturing out. I made armatures. So I made actual molds of armatures so I could build the skeletons of each figure, pose it how I wanted, and then sculpt the epoxy over top of it. And so then we had a little bit of size creep on that. And of course, that was explained away by the fact that the gravity here on our planet is less than it was on theirs. So of course, their newer generations are, a lot bigger than the younger, or than the earlier generations that actually landed here. And so, but now that we've got the standard size, we haven't had any more creep issues with that. So it's they are what they are now. If you have a really big model, it's a rarity, and it's because it's a special model type of thing. We branched out from single shot models from the first round from back in, I want to say 2009 or 2010. And then right before when you got it, we had run a Kickstarter to fund having the actual starter set produced by Valiant in Wisconsin. And they did a great job for us. We have no complaints at all. They did like their spin casting for resin with them. And then, so that's what funded those. And then now, I was still working on keeping everything else in house because it's so expensive. I mean, there's minimum numbers you got to do, and hand casting, while a chore, it was still a more cost-effective thing. It was easier to just cast the smaller batch stuff out of home.
Right. So you did mention that you've had to switch over to doing it now digitally. How was that transition, and how's that coming along?
So back in 2018, I woke up one morning in mid-October and I was numb from the chest down, including my arms and everything. Like, like if your foot falls asleep, you get that like right around the pins and needles phase.
Yes.
That's what it was.
Oh.
And it was constant. So they were looking, they thought maybe it was one of my new meds or whatever. After a while, it turned out it wasn't that. So they ran some tests. So it turns out I have MS. So multiple sclerosis. So, and it's kind of become a permanent thing that it didn't remit. There's nothing. It's kind of constant now. And so I had to reteach myself how to sculpt because I couldn't do fine item manipulation, fine tool manipulation. So as I'm reteaching myself, come February of 2019, then I started getting neuropathic pain from my fingertips to my shoulders and from my toes to my hips. And so that added one more level to it. And so at that point, I was like, you know what, why am I fighting with this? I hopped on, I got a subscription to ZBrush, and I started working out with that to see what I could do. And one of our first models, what we released at Gen Con, was the Shotgunner. That one is the first fully digitally sculpted model, other than the COVID grub and the gun grub. And so honestly, I got to tell you, it worked out well timing wise for how the pricing on everything is now with the printers and
right.
and all that stuff to do at home. But I wish I'd switched to digital so much sooner. Oh my God, it is so, well, it's just, what's great about it is I don't have to worry about accidentally pushing my thumb into something I just sculpted before getting into the cure oven.
Yeah.
And if I do something and I'm not happy about it, I just do a backup on it. I just back out, edit out of it, and I start over again instead of like scraping off epoxy and trying to get it to use again before it dries up.
Right.
So it's been fun. It's been, I mean, obviously it's a little tricky. There's a learning curve to it. But I think I'm getting there. I'm getting much better. The first few faces I did, oh God, they were pretty awful. But I'd throw a couple hours a day at it when I could. And it's a lot easier for me to manage because I have an ergonomic mouse that I use that works better for my hands. And so I also have tablet monitors, so I can use a pen on them, so I can draw on them with that as well. Right. So it's working out really well.
Very cool.
So yeah, so it's going well. It's going well.
Awesome. I don't know what to say. I'm glad you're doing better after being diagnosed with that. So that's wonderful that you're doing so well.
Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit. I want to go back to the storyline just a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
So once they've landed on the planet, they realized they got some bad information. They took up refuge, basically set up headquarters in the Chinese restaurant.
Yep.
How do the mercs fit into it? I'm going to replace some of these guys down here.
Great question.
For those
okay, so
with some of
now
the
Zyn are like they're like a drone society. I mean, you have your little batch groups. You have your leader corps, your support corps, and your scout corps, which are your 3 slots for your basic ZynVaded team. And each group, basically leaders, supports, and scouts, all have little subdivisions. Like your leaders will have a sergeant corps, a captain corps, a commander corps, different things like that. And supports will have like machine gunners, rocket troopers, medics. Scouts will have snipers, swordsmen, and recon. And so each one of them, they're chosen from an early stages when they're grubs to get indoctrinated into that particular corps. They're just tossed in there and they get kind of a battery of training thrown at them, and they just grow into it. And they're all basically intermixable. Like there are no personalities. It's just kind of blank. I mean, your sniper, that's about as much personality as they have. They're the sniper. Your sergeants are sergeants. So what happened is when they landed here, they tapped into, of course, our internet and our satellites and things like that. And so they started to get like inundated by all the different pop culture things that we have: movies, TV shows, comic books, music. And so like there were elements in it, like you have one of the guys, he starts to decide, well, I really like that character. That's so cool. I kind of like to be that guy. And so they started to model themselves based, like model a character based off of their favorite pop culture property. And see, the Zyn aren't necessarily thrilled about that. So half the mercs had to make a decision to either give up the ghost or to go out on their own, strike out on their own and do their own thing. And the fair majority decided that, well, okay, so be it. You don't want this? I do. I'll see you later. But see, because they're so gifted with what they do, they're still kind of in demand on the side. And so whether the Zyn High Command likes to admit it or not, they'll hire out to the mercs to help them out, either as a fourth member of their team or for pretty much all of them except for Zoucher right now. They all have a slot, like Caps America, for instance. He's still in good standing with the Zyn because they look at him like a rallying point for morale and stuff. And so he's allowed to take up a leader slot for a team if he wants, without any hesitation. Otherwise, he can just be a fourth member as an add-on. You got your figures like Z800. Now he's a support slot. Now, because he's Zyn, they have no problem letting him in on the team as a third member if he needs to be. Otherwise, he's just a fourth member. And the whole deal is with the mercs, real quick before we go any further, is because of the slot-based thing, like if you have a merc and like your buddy doesn't, you could still choose to use one of your mercs as long as they have a slot listed, and you just swap it out. And then you still have 3 guys and your buddy is 3 guys. And that way it keeps it even as far as that goes for numbers. But that's okay. So we jump on to scouts. Like you have Copycat. She's a big fan of like the Hunger Games, that sort of thing. And so her thing is she was part of the sniper corps and just didn't feel like sniper rifles were challenging enough. So she picked up a bow and wanted to work with that, but that's a no-no. You have your weapons and you stick with your weapons. So she branched out with that. And then we have Diesel. Now Diesel's fun because he can be any slot. He can be a leader, a support, or a scout. Because he's based off the Riddick character from Pitch Black. Right. So he can kind of do it all. He's kind of a go-to guy. And he actually started out as the instructor for improvised combat in the Zyn Corps.
Oh, very cool.
So
I have a question about this one because this is the one I get asked about a lot.
Deviant. Now, Deviant was that was a figure we did in conjunction with the Cosplay Deviants. Friends of ours were constantly either next door or across from them at conventions, at Gen Con and stuff like that. And we just became friends with them, a long time ago. It's been a long time. It's been 10 years. It's been a long time, but we've been friends with their crew for that long. And we just decided, well, let's make a Terra merc. So she ended up being the first Terra merc, and we'll get into the Terra here in just a sec. And so what we did is we did the figure in conjunction with them, and we did that as our first test for Valiant to see how Valiant did for casting the figures for us. And then so we did like specials at conventions, and they give away a bunch of them at their shows and stuff like that. So yeah, so she's a Terra merc, and she's a big cosplay fan. So that's why she's dressed like the kitty cat.
Yep. Yeah, she was actually. When I painted her up, she was actually probably the one that took me the longest to paint, just because
of the fur, right?
The fur. I was like, what color scheme am I going to use? So you mentioned the Terra. Tell us about the Terra faction.
So the Terra the mercs aren't an official faction at the moment. They're just fill-in figures and add-ons and stuff like that. The Terra are the third official faction for ZynVaded. Basically, when the Zyn landed, they started to use earth insects as like labor for like beasts of burden and different things like that. Well, because of the radiation that their equipment and that their ships put off, it starts to mutate our bugs. So our bugs start to gain sentience and start to gain anthropomorphic properties. Standing upright. Having hands with opposable thumbs, that sort of different stuff. And so as they started to gain sentience, they started to gain intelligence. Well, of course, the Zyn still look at them as savage, so they didn't think much of it. Well, while they were using the Zyn as their labor force, or at the Terra as their labor force, rather, the Zyn were just kind of ignoring the fact that like equipment would go missing or weapons would come missing. They just assumed that these lunkheads were losing them or breaking them or whatever. So what was happening was the Terra was slowly gathering the equipment and the supplies they would need to break free an uprise against the Zyn, which is now what they've done. So now we have an Earth-based force that wants these guys off the planet. So now you have a third faction fighting in. Now that right there, that is the sorceress. She is from the leaders. As you can see, she still has butterfly wings. You can still see, like, so there's a lot of raw elements to these guys. They're very almost post-apocalyptic, almost orky kind of like a look to them. But she's because of the transmutation, the metamorphosis of them, a lot of them are keyed into like almost magical properties, which is in her case, she has an ability to control limited items of magic, limited abilities of magic. And pretty much all the leaders for the Terra are going to have a similar kind of theme with them. The next guy in line is going to be the support. It's going to be the Hooligan. He's basically a big bodyguard because the sorceress is kind of squishy, but that big guy right there, he can lay a whooping on.
And so hammer, yes.
Yes, yeah, he's not fooling around. So yeah, so he's one of their supports, and then the last one there, that's the Huntsman. He's their scout, and he's just a really great archer. That he's their range support, and he comes with some trap tokens. So basically, once per game, he can lay out traps within X amount of inches of himself, and that way he can almost kind of control movement. He can block. He can do like zone control almost to keep everyone from coming in.
So 3 full factions, and a full faction is 3 models. I mean, it's really that simple. And the one that we haven't really talked about yet, we talked about the mercs. Like you said, they're kind of fill-ins or add-in as a 4th character. If you and your
they're meant to be fluffy. They're meant to be fluffy, character-filled, kind of fun additions to the game. Yeah.
This is probably one of the coolest models I've ever seen. He's not painted yet, because I don't know how to paint him yet. I haven't figured that one out. I'm like, how do I paint him and do him justice? But tell us about Zoucha, and he is a merc, and if you haven't figured out what he's based off of, tell us a little bit about Zoucha.
Okay, so Zoucha comes from a race called the Scales. Now, they shared the planet Zyn with the Zyn species. They were basically the boogeyman to the Zyn. These guys got to about a tribal kind of tech level and just sort of leveled off there. They're very much akin to like the Predator, that society as far as that goes. They used to use the Zyn as their labor force and as food and things like that. So they were constantly harassing and going at them. And so when the Zyn left the planet, these guys had no idea where they're going. So they sent scouts everywhere. They just launched scouts out random to different planets to try to track them down. And so Zoucha landed on Earth a couple of years before the Zyn. He got here ahead of them. And once they landed, being outnumbered, he kind of waved a white flag, was like, listen, let's just be cool. We can trade resources. I can offer help if you need it. And so it's an uneasy sort of truce, but it's a truce. But the fact is that unfortunately, with any team other than a Scales force, he can never be a member of. He can only be a 4th. So he can't fill a support slot or a leader slot or a scout slot. He can only ever be used if everybody has a merc and can add in.
Very cool. Now, one of the neat things about him, as you said, he's kind of Predator, so therefore he can become invisible, is he comes with 2 heads.
Stealth tokens.
2 stealth tokens.
Yep.
And when he's invisible, he comes off and these take his place.
Yep.
And then you just move these around the battlefield, and then at any time you say, oh, he's that one.
Yep. Exactly.
Or he's this one over here, depending on where he's
exactly.
Best
Yep. Exactly.
He's a fantastic model. I just can't stop.
And as you can tell,
cool.
They're not insect based, they're lizard based.
Yeah. So being that he's so cool, is there I'm gonna push to the future here. Sure. Is there plans to bring out a scale force?
Yeah. Yep. They are on their way to Earth. So we will at some point be seeing them. I'm hoping that they'll be the next faction after this Kickstarter that gets released. So I've already started working on a team for them. And so their team dynamic is going to be a little bit different than like the Zyn and the Terra. They're not going to have, they're going to have, their leader is going to be a scale character. And then their support and their scout are either going to be like a biological creature that they drag along with them, or like a mechanical drone of some kind, or, excuse me, or they'll actually be able to basically capture and control a Zyn and throw it in like as a scout or something like that. They'll basically have, excuse me, their own way of controlling those guys. It's going to be kind of an odd but fun element to it. So they won't be a standard. You'll still have the leader, support, scout, but it won't be anything like what you're used to with the current teams.
Very cool. So everything that we have seen that I've been showing, and then there's actually more models that I have. I don't have everything, believe it or not, but there are a few out there that are a little more difficult to get a hold of.
Okay, yep, that was from our first Kickstarter. That was the Amos Saran Zilch suit. She was a two-figure pack that was a Kickstarter / convention exclusive for the first Kickstarter. And basically what it was is she was a merc that modeled herself after Samus from the Metroid series. So she called herself Amos Saran. And so she could switch back and forth from her Zero suit or Zilch suit to her Tough suit. And she's no longer available. But for this Kickstarter, she has evolved to the next level. Now with this next Kickstarter, we're reintroducing the Zed-Bugz, which are basically the zombie version of the Zyn. So realistically, any Zyn or Terra that were killed or interacted with pesticides that either killed around them or walked through them, touched by them, whatever, there's a chance that they would be either reanimated as a zombie bug or a Zed-Bug, or that they'd alter their physiology in some other way. And so that's kind of what's happening with the Zeds. With Amos, she had gone on a mission with a Zyn team into one of their little hive locations to check on a lack of communication. When they got there, they got ambushed by some Zeds. Apparently there's a pesticide leak in the hive. It wiped everybody out and reanimated them again. And her team got ambushed. She was the only one that made it out, but she got injured while doing so, and she can't come out of her armor anymore. Her armor is the only thing keeping her from turning into a Zed-Bug. And so she's very upset about that. So now instead of Amos Saran, she's now Amos the Hunter.
So that leads me into a couple of things.
Shoot.
One, and I read that story, and it's fantastic. And anybody who's watching this is probably wondering, do I want to read that story too? That story has actually not really been, I don't know if it's ever been published or if it's out there anywhere.
It hasn't. I'd like to put it on an update with a bio for her is probably what's going to end up happening. Because cool. I've been trying to get bios kind of put on there, but I've just been so under the weather with the last couple of weeks. It was just an odd time to get sick while running a Kickstarter.
Right.
So when we put her bio up, it'll likely be that to kind of really fill in on her, because there are some people out there, obviously like you, that have the first figure, and so they're going to want to know what the next level is for her.
And you can see, I'll put the pictures up in this video, but you can also go to the Kickstarter, which there'll be a link below this video for folks. And you can see the new models, and they're fantastic.
Thank you.
I also know that story and some other stuff, a lot of the other fluff is actually going to be in an updated rule book, which is already been unlocked. So, and it's the rule book that comes with the game is this one. It's relatively small.
Yeah.
About 30 pages, like so. This is about a quarter of a sheet, and I know that the new one is about a half sheet, and it's about 3 times as big. And it's got all of the fluff, everything added into it. So I'm very excited to see that come to light as well. But tell us about this Kickstarter that's going on right now.